Good morning, my name's George and welcome to the latest edition in our current Briefings webinar series, where today we will be talking about the flexibility opportunities artificial intelligence unlocks. I'm joined today by Dr. Irina DiMartino, CEO of Ampex, and Laura Sands, who is Chair of the Government's Energy Digitalisation Task Force and an Independent Director at SGN Network, chairing the ESG Committee. Good morning to you both, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. In just a moment, I will be handing over to Irina and Laura to kick off the presentation. But before that, I'd like to mention that we will have some time allocated at the end of the session for audience questions. So please do stick around until then, and we will make sure your questions are answered. To ensure we see these, please type them in the questions box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Without further ado, I will now pass over to Laura.
Good morning, everybody, and it's absolutely great to be here and to be joined by Irina, who's really one of the most exciting innovators in the energy sector, and thank you to Current. I always have a sort of philosophy that we need to plan from the future, but it's very interesting because I've been saying that for a very long time, and actually the future is really here. It is round the corner, and we really need to lean in and modernise the energy sector. And that's why the Data and Digitalisation Task Forces and all those innovators that are looking at digital solutions are so important. So let me just start by saying that really the energy sector is going through a massive transformation. So instead of us looking at, in many ways, the commodity assets that we have on the system, which we've always had in terms of fossil fuels, actually what we now have is we now have a lot of capital assets. Now, those capital assets might sit in your driveway, on your roof, or in the North Sea. And actually, the marginal cost of the commodity is going down. All of you data geeks will know that in 1990, a terabyte of data was $1 million, and today it's 5 cents. I'm not saying an electron will go that way, but very possibly. But on the other side, you've got what's going on in the consumer end. Now, if I want to access that EV car or that PV or heat pump or an energy service, I'm going to be looking for services, financial services, and all that demand side response that we're going to need. 20 to 30 gigawatts of demand side response that we're going to require will need to be very much enabled by consumer, whether they be SMEs, industrials, or domestic consumers. So where is the new value? The new value actually sits between those silos. And it is about ensuring demand and supply is equally valued. And that's why digitalisation, efficiency and optimisation is key to the future. And if you think about this power system going forward, you've got all these multiple assets. The sector was a really simple sector. I mean, it just hose piped you energy. Now what we're going to have is blended solutions. How do you optimize all these different, not competing, but hopefully aligned needs within the energy sector? And data and digitalisation is going to be absolutely crucial to be able to blend this. Not to be at all derogatory about our wonderful people in the energy sector, but currently we have about 400 people who run the energy sector, and they all know each other's golf handicap, they're all super close, etc. We are moving to 100 million actions and assets. If you think every EV car can do 3 things. So digitalisation is not a nice to have. If we don't digitalise our energy system, modernise it, we are going to have analog collapse. We won't have the visibility that we need. We won't understand the interactions, and we will have to deal with much more dynamic and bi-directional system needs. This will require a totally different form of infrastructure, a digital infrastructure that will deliver us visibility through instrumentation. We're going to have much greater knowledge about customers and the demand side. Everyone spends time thinking about the weather. The weather does not follow legislation. However, we are actually quite boring when you look at consumer analytics, and this will be driven by algorithms. So it is time for investment, and it is time for us to absolutely lean in. We've changed regulation that actually requires data and digitalisation on networks. The government is developing a digital spine that will be an HTML for energy, really, really thin, but allowing interactions and visibility. And the appetite for digitalising the system is increasing, but we do have lack of skills across the policy, regulatory, and the sector actors. Of course, there are absolute stars who have all those skills, but they need also to be within the sector, not just the innovators, because the sector needs to know how to buy and how to invest in digital endgames. So, the future. We are moving from a system that is being determined by big stuff to a system that requires a lot of brain, a lot of digital skills, a lot of new thinking, and a lot of technologies, such as we're going to hear from Ampex. So thank you very much indeed. I hope that's given an overview of where we are.
Thank you, Laura, for that presentation. And remember, for the audience, if you'd like to ask Laura any questions, please do jot them in the questions box down in the bottom right. Now, Irena, over to you.
Thank you and good morning. And first of all, let me just thank Karen for having me and Laura for joining me. I regard Laura as definitely the most charismatic of the energy sector leaders and definitely one of my biggest inspirations. So absolutely delighted to be here. And I will resonate a lot to what she's just said, but hopefully I will also add to in terms of what Ampex has been doing, especially in the realm of the challenges that have been accompanying this unprecedented transition in the energy sector that very often is exemplified by what we regard as the 4Ds, the 4 macro trends, decarbonization, clearly one of them. If we think about the ambitious net zero targets to be reached by 2050, but most importantly for Ampex, the level of decentralization that we see with the shift towards the edge of the grid, and Laura's been telling us, in fact, about this and the requirement for new thinking around how we cope with the multitude of nodes and a system which is no longer a single flow system. And also the digitalization, which is clearly the focus of today's conversation, as well as the role that the consumer wants to have, needs to have, being empowered and being regarded as a main stakeholder now in what will be, in our view, in a decade or so, a fully transacted grid. So what are the challenges that Ampex has been addressing by developing a uniquely positioned value proposition by taking what we consider a whole system approach? We definitely have network operators that are increasingly more challenged by voltage instability. This is due to the increased presence of distributed energy resources at the edge of the grid. And clearly we see that with the electrification of heat and transport and in other geographies, but soon also in the UK. I'm currently actually linking in from Australia, where there is a very high penetration of rooftop solar PVs, and that challenges network operators with minimum operational demand and voltage instability. We've got clearly a lack of inertia in the system due to the decommissioning of synchronous machines for power generation. We've got an issue with resilience of the network, and we've got the attempt from a number of stakeholders and obviously the regulator leading the charge in encouraging and actually requesting that technology providers and system operator and market operator minimize the expensive network reinforcement in order to cope with the challenges of the changing grid. So as Laura said, we have the opportunity, and she actually said digitalization is not a nice to have, it's a must have, it's an essential requirement that needs to become an enabler for the grid of the future. We have an unprecedented level of visibility because we get data now from a multitude of different sources that are to do with energy consumption, with energy usage. But the problem here is no longer how we gather data, because we've got the opportunity to do so, but it's how we make sense of that data, how we then process the data in order to enable informed decisions by the relevant stakeholders. So what Ampex has been working on is capturing data from a multitude of nodes and through our software platform, making sense of that data to enable what we call active network management, as well as optimization of things like capacity. And we've taken a very unique approach, which is a proprietary approach that we have inherited, so to speak, through one of our main technology brains in the organization that was working for a couple of decades in the Ministry of Defense in the UK, having developed autonomous systems. And we get to characterize our solutions not only as fully automated, but most importantly, as fully autonomous. Now, not many are familiar with the distinction between autonomy and automation. What we mean by autonomy is a state-of-the-art decision-making capability technology that enables essentially nodes, as we call them, so devices and assets to be able to make informed decisions about changing boundary conditions. So that allows us to move away from a centrally controlled control systems as we try and cater for this multitude of different nodes at the edge of the grid that we're trying to optimize against a number of constraints in order to unlock ultimately flexibility at a very large scale. And if we think that we're trying to cater for unlocking flex, and in our case, we focus on a number of solutions, but also on consumers and residential users in particular, we look at what the weakness in that paradigm is, and actually we think that the major uncertainty lies with human behavior. So far, we've been witnessing, demand response as an emerging and more increasingly so non-wire alternative, which hinges on the ability to prompt humans with a response so that they, for instance, can vary demand at peak times. So that is something that is successful for a limited period of time, but is certainly not scalable, and it cannot cater with the demand of a fully decarbonized system that needs to cope with the intermittency of renewable sources. So there needs to be flexibility, which actually is delivered to the system on a continued basis. And if we want to move away from behavioral demand response, for example, we need to empower a technology that becomes trusted by the consumer and moves away from reliance on consumer behavior, which is actually for us what we need to absolutely overcome. So we want to empower the consumers, we want to engage with the consumers, but not burden the consumers with continued prompt around behavioral choices. So we have developed a software platform that actually caters for a number of interoperable offerings, one of which is the asset management platform, which is what we consider the skeleton of our system architecture. We essentially monitor and optimize the dispatch of a number of assets, namely batteries in front of the meter. We're commercially active in the US with a number of generation assets, but even with behind the meter assets. For instance, in Australia, where I currently am, we've got a customer and we've dispatched over 1,000 residential batteries, providing additional capacity in the aim of additional reserve capacity in the summer. And we're actually the first VPP provider to do that from behind the meter assets. We have what we call dynamic load shaping, essentially a holistic energy management system for behind the meter that is meant to cater for a number of different nodes and unlocking flexibility at a very large scale. And I'll tell you more about what we've been doing in that respect in a moment. And we are the first of a kind manufacturer of a smart transformer, which is now live in the UK Power Network grid. And what it does, it not only solves issues on network level to do with voltage instability, it optimizes by a factor. But very interestingly, because it's equipped with onboard processor and high-frequency data sensors, it allows us to basically have insights into the behavior of the LV network. And as you can imagine, that's very strategic for network operators because it allows them to have informed decisions around capacity optimization and network planning. And it's the first time that we have a transformer connected to a cloud-hosted data engine. And that's given us very interesting upsides, as well as the first time that we have a proactive way to manage the life, ultimately, of a transformer as a capital asset on grid. The unique value proposition around the software platform that Ampex has developed is the fact that we gather data ultimately from a variety of different nodes, and we used advanced algorithms in order to process that data and to train our predictive algorithms. Therefore, this is where the digitalization aspect really comes in very heavily. And you can see they will go front to the meter assets, as well as, very importantly, all these very different devices behind the meter that need to be optimally dispatched and controlled in order to, one, enable dynamic tariffs, which we see emerging with retailers as a value prop for consumers, but also demand response at a large scale. And I'm very excited to share some of the photos of the first smart transformer that is now live on grid in the UK Power Network grid. And as I said, happy to tell you a bit more perhaps at the end, towards the end of this, through the Q&A, because it's definitely very exciting if we think of a piece of infrastructure that has not been smart traditionally. But what I'm a big advocate of, and what I resonate very much with Laura, is the need to empower consumers, but in the appropriate way, through a technology that provides us with consumer insights and that shifts the behavior of the consumer by leaving the choice, the preferences to the user, but also enabling a level of data analytics and behavioral insights that aids the unlocking of flex from an untapped otherwise source, which is behind the meter consumer homes. So what we have developed is what we call a digital energy assistant. We've named it ALICE, which is an acronym that stands for Agents for Lifestyle-Based Intelligent Control of Energy, because what we actually think of is a technology that wants consumers not to worry about energy per se, because the consumer wants an easy journey in their home, having visibility of the usage of electricity, optimizing energy costs, and having also the ease of avoiding to interface with different many apps if he wants to have insights into what happens across the ecosystem per se. So ALICE gathers data from a multitude of different devices that are connected to it. It elaborates that data. It also combines it with forecasting, from weather forecasting to price signals, and optimizes against constraints. There could be price signals and/or tariffs, dynamic tariffs, and it ultimately optimizes the scheduling of those devices so that on one hand is catering for user preferences, because we're very user-centric and we believe that that is where we differentiate our value proposition, as well as grid constraints, which we're ultimately trying to alleviate by unlocking flexibility. I'm not going to go into further detail because I know that we want time for Q&A, but I'm happy to take questions after this, and thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Irena, for that very nice detailed presentation. And like Irena said, we will now move into the Q&A section. So please do get your questions in. I might ask one just so we can give people a bit of time to get more questions in. So Irena, in early February, it was confirmed that the smart transformer was to be trialled by UK Power Networks in East Sussex. I was wondering if maybe you could tease some of the information from this and any early findings.
Yeah, we've got the smart transformer, the first of a number that is going live. They are going live, one of which is live in UK Power Networks grid. What's exciting is the smart transformer gathers a number of power quality data that are load, voltage, harmonics, and gives us essentially a picture of the network behavior. And what we have done in order to monitor the effect of the smart transformer on the network is we've also deployed in a number of people's homes around the substation where the smart transformer is located, smart plugs. The smart plugs provide us endpoints voltage data that the cloud data engine of Ampex elaborates. And although we don't need the smart plug data in order to see what happens on the network, we basically utilize that data to provide training to our predictive algorithms and understand even better the picture that we get from the smart transformer around the network behavior. As you can imagine, it's the first time that we have a network insights in terms of behavior that comes from a piece of infrastructure that otherwise was passive, non-smart. So that is in its own right a big strategic benefit to the network operators, and we're obviously going to watch the picture evolving as the trial is underway with a number of different units, because we will also simulate provision of synthetic inertia from a number of smart transformers in the network of UKPN.
Perfect, thank you. And just very quickly, I've noticed a question in our in the box. Phil Jeffrey says he worked with UKPN on the smart transformer. He just wants to know if it's a neutral trial or a paid for commercial service.
No, it's not. It's a part of what we call a network innovation allowance trial. So UKPN is essentially utilizing a regulator fund in order to trial a new technology on the network. And the interesting thing about an NIA trial is not only UKPN is obviously directly involved as the adopting technology entity, but the results are also available to other DNOs, which for us obviously become an enhancer and an enticer for other interlocutors around the table.
Perfect, thank you. And Laura, maybe we'll come to you next. So where do you see AI truly making a change in terms of flexibility? How does it actually secure a more prominent role?
I mean, in many ways, if you look at other sectors and other system designs, AI is prevalent right the way across them. I mean, one of the things that's particularly interesting about the energy sector is it is in many ways very interrelated, i.e. whatever goes on at one part of the system will impact the whole chain. So AI is going to be absolutely crucial in terms of understanding the 100 million actions and assets, managing them, ensuring that there isn't in some ways cascades. So in our digitalisation task force, we do talk about algorithm governance, which is going to be incredibly important to ensure that we don't end up with lots of competing issues. But currently, everything is done by picking up the telephone and saying, you know, ramp up Johnny, right? This is not going to be feasible in this multi-directional world. So I think we are on a journey. I think what we can do is learn from lots of other sectors. I really do think that the energy sector doesn't get out enough.
Yeah,
so can I just pick up one of the questions that's there? And it's about privacy. And it's really important, this dimension. And again, picking up from the Digitalisation Task Force, we recommended that there is introduced a customer consent portal. And that actually then allows for all the great technologies that Ampex and others are doing to actually, in many ways, sell the benefits of what they're offering, but ensure that the consumer is there in control.
Perfect, thank you. And thank you for answering the additional question there as well. Really do appreciate that. So, Irena, I think the next question for you is from Elizabeth Thomas, who asks, what cutting edge ML models are you implementing within the AmpX infrastructure?
Clearly, I'm not here to speak on behalf of my machine learning experts, but for what I can contribute to answer this question, we start with Bayesian reasoners, which are based on experts analysis, and then we introduce data that would essentially help modify these models with learned parameters, and that essentially enhances the training of the predictive capabilities of the algorithms. But we are into convoluted neural networks and things that are very belong to the highly skilled team of data science in Ampex, of which I prefer not to be other than the voice on the surface at this stage. But yes, we use Bayesian reasoners to start with, and then learned parameters that help the training of models to be enhanced.
Fantastic, thank you. And Abigail Ward's asked a very nice question. So maybe, Laura, if we start with you on this one, how do you think it's best to engage and empower all consumers in this transition to ensure that no one is actually left behind?
Well, firstly, I'd love to pick up what Irene says, because absolutely it's important that we take the complexity away from consumers. And I absolutely go tonto every time somebody says, oh, let's try and engage consumers, because I don't want to become a heating engineer or an electrician. You know, I have no interest, right? Despite being an energy geek. So what we need to do is to deliver propositions to consumers that do two or three things. Number one, it needs to deliver them the service that they want. So they want heat at a certain time, they want their car. So that is absolutely crucial. But then to recognize that they have assets sitting in their driveway, on their roof, heating their home. And these assets, they can actually derive revenue from. So there is a clear business proposition. There is a consumer protection issue that needs to be put in place, and that's developing. But in many ways, the relationship that I have or should have with an energy company, and I'm not saying necessarily an energy supplier, should be very customer focused, but delivering me value. And with that, you have actually taken the complexity away. That is what's called good customer propositions. That's where we need to get to.
I would like to add to that, perhaps with my excitement being in Australia currently and engaging with some really forward thinkers. I say this without diminishing in any way what we're doing in the UK. In fact, I think that Australia is looking to what we're doing in the UK, but they've got perhaps bigger degrees of freedom for the challenges that they face in a market which is very fast moving and lacks resilience. So we exactly for what Laura said, we partnered here in Adelaide with one of the top 3 centers of excellence in machine learning, the Australian Institute for Machine Learning, and we're bridging across the psychology department, because what we've been doing with the energy system catapult a year ago, when we deployed our energy management system Alice behind the meter, we actually gave priority to consumer insights. For us, behavioral insights is really what drives that value proposition that removes the complexity that Laura exactly is pointing towards. It's not so much the integration of different devices. That's also a challenge for a technology provider. But what we really need to absolutely get right is that user-centric approach, because if the consumer has got trust towards the technology, ultimately relinquishes control because he's confident that his preferences or her preferences are being catered for, without jeopardizing any of that, whilst also alleviating constraints on grid, which obviously he doesn't want to know anything about, but us technology in the middle know about and try to optimize against. But that consumer needs to be engaged without burdening it, which is where the behavioral insights really comes in very heavily for what Ampex is trying to do.
Could I also say that if you look at other sectors, they understand their customers.
Yeah.
The energy sector hasn't got a clue. So they divide the 60 million people in the UK into 6 archetypes. Amazon divides us into 150,000 different archetypes. And this form of technology, understanding customers, exists in lots of other sectors. And I think your technology is going to be one of the first to really start to get that texture that we need to unlock that consumer demand side response.
Well, we're very hopeful that that is the case, and we are resonating with retailers, large retailers, and to be a 3-year-old organization that finds itself at the table with such large potential customers is obviously a big substantiation that the user centricity is definitely what gets traction across the stakeholders with such challenges.
Perfect, thank you both. And it sort of ties in nicely to the next question, which comes from Matt Hatton. Besides the UK, which regions or geographies are most favourable to trial and deploy AmpX's solutions? So, Irena, I think that's probably going to be directed at you. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I think Australia, that's why I'm sitting here. We are really excited. We've got Ampex platform already live in Western Australia, live with another very interesting player that is New South Wales based, but we're doing something extremely exciting in South Australia, and that is also leveraging the AMP parent company, which is at the forefront of a green hydrogen power asset play, where the Alice becomes actually an enabler to optimize the self-sustainment of consumers, as well as the response to what's needed from an electrolyzer standpoint on grid. So a very whole system approach exemplified in South Australia with our strategy partnership.
Perfect, thank you. And maybe another question which just does come up from Phil Jeffrey, who asked, does AmpX offer commercial market microgrid solutions? Irena, sorry. Oh. Okay, so Laura, maybe I should ask a quick question because it seems we've lost Irena there. If you have time, where in the energy sector do you believe AI machine learning could operate efficiently and optimize performance?
I mean, it needs to operate throughout because it's not a series of silos, it's a connected piece. But I do think that very importantly, it's going to be very much around the networks and how do we optimize. Net zero is a really interesting concept because it is not a consumption concept. It is all about optimization, and it is all about flattening curves in many ways, flattening peaks. And so I would say that the networks and the ESO are certainly the places to start. I have to go.
Okay. I do apologize. I lost you for a second. So if there was a question, I'm happy to take it now, and apologies again.
No worries. I'll just because Laura needs to go, I'll let her pop off. And the question I asked Laura just before she left was, where in the energy sector do you believe AI and machine learning could operate efficiently and optimize performance? I think
it's definitely, with the two offerings that I've been talking about, we've got the infrastructure with the LV network, where we are very strong believer that the smart transformer will not only optimize the network itself and resolve challenges at local levels due to the increased level of decentralization, but it will provide a number of upsides and ultimately enable this transition from DNO to DSO in the UK, with becoming another technology that provides flexibility to grid. But I am a big advocate of a lot of work that needs to be done for behind the meter flexibility to be truly an active contributor to the transition and the net zero targets to be met. There is a massive level of untapped flex behind the meter, simply because there hasn't been the right approach and the right technology to enable that play to actually cater for consumer needs on one hand and grid constraints on the other.
Perfect, thank you. And got one question here. I'm not sure if you'll be in a position to answer it, but how do we ensure that algorithmic data-driven control isn't corrupted, causing critical infrastructure being compromised? Is this something you can...
I can probably say in my position, again, I'm not the cyber expert in Ampex. We've got a cyber team, as you can imagine, as a software-centric platform. We are compliant with 27001, but we also take a defense-centric approach to essentially detecting threats, as well as leveraging the autonomy of our own products, including the smart transformers, to detect anomalies in the network. And thanks to that machine learning piece, even the smart transformer itself is aware of changing boundary conditions that are not in line with what's expected. So that in its own right is another means to making the technology safe for the infrastructure threats. But obviously, I guess the compliance with cyber protocols and what's expected around established protocols is what we do in order to be robust with our offerings across the different stakeholders that we serve.
Fantastic. Thank you, Irene. I think that's a nice way to round off, as I think we've run out of time here. So thank you again for your contribution. And obviously, I know Laura's left, but thank you to her as well for a really interesting presentation and Q&A. And thank you, obviously, to everyone who's joined us and contributed with questions to this webinar. So I hope you have a lovely Thursday, and keep an eye on Current for the next Briefings webinar. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.